Elliot, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, good to see you.
This is so much fun. Thanks for taking the time. We get to catch up, and we get to talk about interesting things, and then invite other people to kind of listen in after the fact. But I've been wanting to do both of those things with you for a while.
Yeah.
And you are coming to us live from the glorious state of Washington.
Yep, Tacoma, Washington.
And are you at home?
I'm at home. Yeah, coming to you live from the basement.
From the basement. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot that basements are a thing in Washington. They are not in the deserts nor in California. My primary places where I reside.
I basically grew up in a basement because there's so much rain here that, with two brothers, my mom was like, get down there.
Get down there.
That was our space. Yeah. So, it's my new off from home. Just
go fight, tackle each other, break stuff that's down there. Just stay out of my dining room.
Yep. Legos, Star Wars, it doesn't matter. Just that was our spot. Yep. So basements are a thing in the Northwest for sure.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump into like where you are in life right now. I want you to talk about the work that you do, the work that you have done, kind of how you got here. I know that it is, you just tell us about the work that you do.
Okay. Currently I serve as the Chief Development Officer with a health and human services not-for-profit called Lutheran Community Services Northwest. And
Lutheran Community Services Northwest. Okay.
That's right. Yep. And Lutheran Community Services Northwest is about to hit our centennial year. So we've been doing this type of work for many years across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We're part of a larger network of Lutheran social service agencies around the nation. And we have 5 sort of primary areas of work that we call lines of service. So it's behavioral health or counseling work that we're doing with a lot of individuals, family and community support. Sometimes those are resource centers for low-income families that are needing extra support, like especially right now. Refugee and immigrant services, child welfare, so foster care type work, and then aging and independent living and crime victim services. So we do a lot of different things. And my responsibility is to help raise support and be a bridge with the philanthropic community to invite people into that work.
Okay. When you say invite people into that work, you mean for them to give their money primarily, although I'm sure that there's other expressions, but you're out there building bridges and building relationships so that people can give financially and support the cause that's been around for 100 years and is doing all kinds of important work for the vulnerable, for the at-risk, for the marginalized in the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely. Yep. Well put. Exactly.
That's awesome, dude. I didn't realize, I guess, that it was that many different people groups, different at-risk peoples.
Yeah, it's grown up through the years. All the 3 states merged in 2001. So we've had different cities with their own expression or their own specialty based on what the community need was. And sometimes we share that now, those best practices across, which is really fun to see. So if we're seeing a lot of success in one area, we can sort of cross-train each other and share resources. And so we're committed to marginalized people, like you said, and innovation, and also being in partnership with faith community and different community groups. And so it's been really wonderful work. I've been doing that for about 1.5 years. And then prior to that, should I talk about a couple other things I've been working on?
Almost.
Stay there for a minute?
Almost. Yeah, let's just stay there for a second. So it's Lutheran is the leading term.
Right.
Are you Lutheran, and how does that kind of affiliation play into the work?
I don't attend a Lutheran church now. We're part of a Presbyterian church here in town, but I grew up in a Lutheran church, and I was confirmed, so very much familiar with some of the theology and the expression. Knew that the Lutheran Church has this deep commitment to welcome the stranger and to be a welcoming presence. All are welcome here. So we have this long history with donors, staff, and volunteers who connect with the Lutheran Church in some way. But we also have staff from lots of different faith groups, and we're an inclusive agency that serves anyone regardless of their background. So we have these roots and these core values, but we also what I like about it is that we have partnerships from the state level down to the grassroots level.
So Lutheran as a concept comes from Martin Luther.
Yep.
And what makes it distinct from other people that have kind of grown up, Christian or aware of it, but they don't know all the denominational breakdowns?
Yeah, well, now you're testing me on my Martin Luther history, right?
Sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. But yeah, I mean, some of the denominations grew out of a particular, leader or thought. So Martin Luther, one of his hallmarks during the Reformation was, that people didn't need mediation to connect with God, right?
Right.
And so he had his theses, and then churches we have different expressions of Lutheran churches in the United States, so Missouri Synod or ELCA, right? The Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. In our agency, we say we're pan-Lutheran, which basically means we straddle those and don't get worried so much in terms of the ways that the church is organized, but basically, yeah, Christian faith and of folks that are part of the Lutheran Church, and very much like doers and oftentimes humble in their approach. But what I'm covering more and more as I'm sort of re-engaging with the Lutheran Church is its deep history with some of these marginalized groups, and just being the church outside of Sunday mornings, which I really appreciate.
I really appreciate that too. I love that, and it's obvious in the work that you're a part of, and that organization has been around for 100 years in a geographic location is amazing. And I just will follow up that the first thing that you mentioned was his desire to help people see that they don't need a mediator between them and God, and that the Pope, the priests, the whatever, and kind of keeping people away from their text or even their communication with God, that just needed to change. And we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but it seems like we're having another one of those, in a sense, in this generation, that in some ways our churches, our mega churches, our professional pastors have inadvertently kind of followed the same path, because when you build something, it becomes an institution becomes layers, and then all of a sudden the thing that you were trying to avoid all these years ago is kind of happened to you again. I'm not saying you in terms of your Lutheran tribe, but
sure.
Just across the board, it seems like there's a little bit of a movement away from that, and even as we're still kind of in lockdown status in this age of pandemic, people are realizing that they have the same access to God at home that they did in the box on Sunday.
Yeah, and connecting to your community looks a lot different right now, but it does, I think, and we can talk about this, but I think it helps us re-examine and look at ourselves, look at what are those essentials, or where are those places where our traditions have maybe become entrenched, or we just assumed certain things, but we've gotten stuck in some ways. So while I think it makes you miss being in person with people, it also has been interesting to see how people connect online and still have the deep commitment to each other. And I would agree. Yeah.
I want to talk about that commitment to each other. And so we're going to come back to that concept and place and Tacoma and the purpose around that, because you've lived there for a long time and you have great influence in that area beyond just this current work that you do with the Lutheran organization. But tell us what you did before this. Was it Habitat for Humanity?
Yeah, just before this, I worked with Habitat for about almost 7 years. And I started there as the director of homeowner services. So I was working with a team that was responsible for helping first-time home buyers achieve that dream. And it was all the preparation of that and the training and education, but also making sure there was financial readiness and financial need, which was one of the criteria. And then from there, I moved back into the fundraising roles. But I loved some of that time. One, just because in our area, the Seattle area and the greater Puget Sound area, affordable housing, it just became, front and center. It was really interesting to grow up in this town and then all of a sudden to see Tacoma the number one spot for housing in the United States. It hit sort of national headlines for how fast housing prices were going up and rent was going up. So to be in the middle of all that was pretty amazing, daunting, but amazing. And then just having some of the experiences I did to work with residents. So we were able to create some grassroots leadership programs it was like, you get to the home celebration, which was really cool, but then it's like, now you're building a community of 30 homes all of a sudden, and you need to create new norms and elevate, give a voice to the residents. So how do you want to be as a community? And to be on that ground floor of that was amazing experience. So we created Tech Connects through that, which is something that I'll always remember and be appreciative of that experience. And then prior to that, working for other local nonprofits as an executive director for an organization that mostly did work with youth around mental health and counseling. And then I've done some other things as well over the last 20 years. So it's been sort of a commitment to place, but also vulnerable people groups has been really what drives me.
Okay, I have lots of questions.
Yeah.
And so we can bounce back to Habitat and how all that works, but let's just follow with what you just said.
Okay.
Which is you have been in a variety of roles in a variety of not-for-profits and committed to vulnerable youth, people that are vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that conviction come from that you would choose that path? Because you could have done a lot of things. You're a very bright person. Mm-hmm. Why do you think you went down this path and have stuck with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the real answer, it felt like at the time when I chose this, it was not something I was thinking about doing, even though in retrospect, my parents gave me a model for this. So my dad had led a homeless ministry up in Seattle for years when I was growing up, and then led a local counseling group. But of course, when I went down that path, it didn't occur to me that I was maybe following his footsteps a little bit. And then my mom was a public health nurse for a lot of her career, working with low-income pregnant women. And I always appreciate about my parents that they had these really affluent friends, and they were in that circle, but then they had folks that were just, maybe one step from homeless that they were interacting with, and not just professionally, but even in their friend group. And so I think growing up, I had a little bit of a vision of that. And then coming out of college, I didn't really have a sense of what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd be a teacher. I wasn't sure. And I had a chance to do some sort of peer counseling work with young men coming out of our local juvenile detention center, which at first I was thinking, this is way too heavy. It's too intimidating. But as I got into it and started hearing some of their stories, it just, not only did it break my heart, but it just gave me a whole new lens into this community I grew up in, but had been separated from because of the privilege I had to grow up the way I did. And so I think it was hard once that's in your blood, it's hard to move away from that. And I've even tried in some ways. So I've written about that, where I've tried to go this way, and it's I feel like I get pulled back here despite my best efforts. And then, in hindsight, it's oh yeah, that was good. I'm glad it worked out that way, despite what I was thinking. So I wouldn't say it's always been intentional, but it's been such a gift to me, which maybe sounds cliche to say. I get just as much out of this work because it does open me up to what's real and what's important.
Yeah. So I know that for a season while you're doing the counseling stuff, so you had to go you got a master's in counseling?
Yep.
And then do you still practice? Do you still counsel people on the side?
I don't, at least not formally. I mean, I don't even say I counsel people informally, but I do find myself in a lot of conversations where, I'm sitting in hard places with people, different leaders and others. And I appreciate that because I consider it sacred ground. And I've often wondered if I'm going to move back there at some point to do more formal counseling work. Yeah.
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 Well, what do you think? Do you think that you will? You might open up your own practice one day, or do you think that you get enough of that, you scratch that itch enough just in the interactions that you have with other leaders?
Well, I've been through a couple of experiences, not just my own counseling work that's been really incredible, but also have been through some group experiences like leadership circles that have been pretty vulnerable and real. And I've found in those experiences that I'm drawing back on this counseling training that I appreciate the group work, and being with a group of leaders, for example, and facilitating a conversation that gets to a place of heart and not just strategy, but also the one-on-one and creating a disarming place to be safe. So to answer your question, I think I would like to maybe either do it through and do some more professional counseling work at some point, or be a coach and either offer that through retreats or one-on-one. So I've been thinking about that, and I don't know what that looks like right now. It's like, being deeply engaged in this work and as a dad and all the other things of life,
How do you define the difference between a counselor and a coach?
Well, I think when I think about some of the therapy work that I was doing, or that some of my friends do, it's either with a particular specialty, so like maybe trauma informed, or around a particular diagnosis, or you want to get more deeply into some anxiety disorders or some things like that. So I think sometimes coaches can be trained and have that kind of training to do that well. But I think for some, it's maybe a step before that. It's more of like looking at life holistically and trying to figure some things out. But when it gets to some more deeper, like I'll just say trauma or something like that, or an issue that's going to require a little bit more specialization, that where maybe a counselor would come in or have a longer therapeutic relationship. But they're similar, I think, in terms of confidentiality, in terms of starting from a place of being vulnerable. And I think sometimes coaching, from my perspective, is focused sometimes on professional goals or on something along those lines. But I think when done well, it starts also from a place from imperfection, not just getting everything dialed in.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've done plenty of pastoral kind of counseling in the past.
Yeah.
And then now presently a lot more that I would classify as coaching. And one of the distinguishing things that I've talked about with other coach friends is that they aren't as focused, and maybe even in some cases avoidant of past issues. And they're going present to future. What's present? Where do you want to go? And then how do we create a path to get there? Yeah. And I think that can be helpful in distinguishing coaches at times, although I think it's maybe it's my background and you would kind of share the same instincts, but I think that at times you do have to just lean into and address where some of the pain is coming from.
Sure. Yeah.
Up into a point, like you said, where you want to refer to a specialist when it gets kind of out of the realm. But that's how I've thought about it. And for what it's worth, you would be a fantastic coach. And that's something that we should have a follow-up conversation about.
All right. I will look forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the therapy or the counseling. There's the run of nonprofit organizations. There's the model that you've seen from your family. And then there's also this extra little component for you that is place. It's geography. It's Tacoma, Washington. And from the short time that I spent up there when Hillary and I were dating, or when we were just newly married, and we lived up there for 3 years in Gig Harbor, right over the bridge from Tacoma. I was taken by the number of people that I met. I'm thinking primarily you. I'm thinking Matt Enlow. I'm thinking Ross Stewart. I'm thinking some people like that that all of you kind of had this sense of, this is home. This is where I'm investing. I'm not going to chase a career. I'm not going to chase a numeric amount, a dollar figure. I'm not going to chase that somewhere else. I feel called to this place more than I feel called to a particular vocation or job title or something like that. Do I have that right? And can you say more about that for you personally?
Yes, you do have that right. And it wasn't always like that, the way I like to tell the story. And I don't know if this is common, but you grow up in a place and it's kind of like familiarity breeds contempt, or, is this all? I'm going to get out of here. And so, because even going to college in the same town where I grew up in, which was a great experience, but I was really in the thought process of like, I'm going to move, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go and sort of spread my wings and whatnot. And so when I had come back to Tacoma, so I spent a year essentially working in different places. I worked up in Alaska. I did a little bit of the backpacking thing in Europe with some of the money I'd saved.
Okay, say a little bit more about that. What did you do? What did you do in Alaska? What did you do in Alaska?
I was a bus driver, and I taught myself to play the harmonica. So I was a musical bus driver at that. I was working for Princess Tours and taking people, on tour rides with some other tour guides as well. And so I stayed up there for the summer.
So they'd get off the cruise ship and they would get on your bus, and you would drive them around, and it was freaking cold, but you were in Alaska and you were having an adventure.
That's right. Exactly. And it wasn't that cold because it was the summer and I was in Fairbanks. So I got to experience, 80-degree weather and no darkness. It was strange. So
it's dark like for 3 hours.
Yeah. Not even dark, like coming out of a movie at 1 a.m. and it's still like kind of light out. You're like, what? So that was an experience for sure. And it kind of taught me my first thing about being alone and knowing myself, because I very much just did that on my own. I just went up and did it, and I'm grateful for it. So that was what I was doing up in Alaska. I was exploring Alaska, which I recommend if you can get up there, because it's a huge and amazing state.
And then you did the same kind of deal, an adventure with the backpacking thing, just wanted to be alone and to do a thing and to say that you did it and to explore?
Yeah, well, my parents met in a youth hostel in Munich, so I had a little bit of this family lore going on too. It's like, you should maybe get over there at some point. I didn't know if I was going to meet someone or just, do the backpacking thing. But it was, again, 3 months by myself on trains, which was remarkable and lonely and amazing gift to be able to do that. And then I just packed up all my stuff and drove down to Boulder, Colorado, and I was skiing and exploring the mountains for a while. And then I eventually got back to Tacoma. So to answer your question, I'll come for full circle. I got back to Tacoma and I met some of these guys, and you mentioned a couple of them. And I also met a new mentor, Dave Hillis, who it wasn't at the time. I heard him speaking, and he was talking about being committed to place. And he was using quotes by like G.K. Chesterton saying, people didn't love Rome because she was beautiful. She was beautiful because people loved her. And, if you commit to a place, and this is at a time in Tacoma where it was still having lots of issues in terms of, some gang violence. And, it was known as sort of this gritty pulp mill town, and everyone was moving to Seattle after graduation because it was cool and there's nightlife. So it wasn't really cool to commit to it, but I was glad to do it because part of it was the work I started doing, and then connecting with some group of people that were like, you know what, this is a city that if we put down our roots, it could be beautiful. It is beautiful already. And there's God's at work, people are at work. What if we could be part of that? And so to do that in my hometown and to kind of come back with new eyes and say, I've had this all along, I just didn't see it, was humbling and pretty amazing. So now I just feel like it's really nice to have found a place that who knows where the world's going to go in my life, but at this point we're committed.
Dude, I love it. And I love it because for all kinds of reasons, but for one, I've lived in some pretty beautiful places, including Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, and Gig Harbor, and Tacoma being right up there. But it seems like even in places like Newport Beach and Huntington Beach, where a lot of people that maybe grow up in middle America, they're like, or LA. That's like the dream, is like get to Orange County or get to Los Angeles, but it's interesting. Like the people that live there, that grew up there, they want to go somewhere else. They're tired of the traffic, or they're tired of the opulence, the money that's too expensive. Their parents are there. Newport feels old now to them, or whatever. Huntington has a little bit of that, where people stay and kind of multi-generations are there. But it's so interesting to me that is that's almost common in Tacoma. And let's just talk about what the hard things are. The hard things are that it's like gloomy and it rains and it's drizzly like 8 months, 9 months out of the year, right?
Yep, that's one.
But the summers are some of the most beautiful places you could be in the world.
Absolutely.
In that Northwest. It's unbelievable, the beauty. But for a lot of the year, it's drizzly. It's not extreme. It's not freezing, but it's in that like 45 to 65 range and gray. And then Tacoma, it was famous for a season by being called the aroma of Tacoma, the smell, like you said, from the pulp mills.
Yep.
That's largely gone now, but that's still a stigma. And what else are you having to overcome there?
Well, I think it started back even when the city started, because we still call ourselves the city of destiny. And we, some of us that love it wear that moniker with pride. But, it was called that because the railroad was supposed to stop here and then bypassed and went to Seattle. And Tacoma was like, wait, what's up? You're supposed to stop here. And so I think from the beginning, it was sort of like this chip on our shoulder of like, wait, we're being overlooked, And I remember back in the day, just because of a variety of things, even to get friends to come down from Seattle to visit, it felt like I was asking them to go to California, because it just felt like this big divide and it wasn't even that far away. So I do think that there's sort of some of the origins there. And it was just, the downtown was not revitalized at that point. That was starting to happen in the late 90s through University of Washington, Tacoma, and the art museum, and some of this renaissance that started to happen right about there. But over the last 20 years, it's been remarkable, like what's happened in Tacoma. But for a while there, it just didn't seem that cool, unless you just kind of came at it from a different angle. And that was, and I'm standing on the shoulders of other makers and artists and people that were doing that through the 80s and 90s too, that were just gutting it out and enjoying that grit city. But, there was also, like I said, a lot of, drug and gang violence going on in certain parts of town. And
that Hilltop, right? Wasn't Hilltop famous?
Yeah. It was. I lived in the Hilltop for 10 years, and I was on the same block as the lady who basically was in charge of all the organizing to get residents together to sort of take back the streets from violence and crime. And so I learned a lot through that experience too. Just people that were doing amazing things to look after each other. The power of neighbors, when you really talk and collaborate. That's awesome. And you've seen in that time and up until now that Hilltop totally transformed and turned around, right? From being one of the epicenters of gang violence to now being just, safe. And it's safe, and it's having its own struggles, right? Because you have a line coming through MLK, we call it the medical mile. So there's these two hospital systems, and now we have a extension of, and it's showing progress and development, right? You're going to have a light rail going through there, but then you're seeing all kinds of gentrification and housing prices going up. And so you have residents that have been living there for years, whether they're renting or some owned, but they're getting pushed out. And so that's a very real thing, not just in Tacoma. You see it in lots of cities that are right up. Oakland saw this with San Francisco. Like we were right up next to, when you see this region of boom happening. So some of the good and then some of the hard when a city's regenerating or growing.
Yeah. So let's bring it back around to the Lutheran work. So how would your organization then engage with something like that? Do you, or are you just kind of seeing that as a backdrop of more of the micro situations that you're engaged in?
Well, it is a backdrop in every place where we're working, especially urban areas, right? So we have offices in Seattle and Spokane and Portland, Tacoma. So any of those urban areas are going to be dealing with affordable housing at some level. We don't we're not at the space where we provide affordable housing as an organization. We partner, and then we are doing some of the work to connect with folks, whether it's in our resource centers or oftentimes when they're either homeless and needing housing navigation. So we have housing navigators. In Tacoma specifically, our specialty has been seniors and senior support, which is a big topic right now in light of COVID-19 in terms of feeding and meals support, so Meals on Wheels and transportation to appointments. So we have a lot of isolated seniors, and it's growing. The demographics growing as more and more boomers get into that space. And if they don't have family or resources, then that's where the church or Rotary groups or our organization need to team up, because there's not enough resources at the government level to support all those folks. And so that's kind of where we intersect in a place like the Hilltop.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to place and being committed to a place, how are you, if someone is watching or listening and they think, there's something in them that desires that, or maybe feels like, maybe I'm called to a place too. How have you seen that play out in terms of the good in your life and your family's life and the good in a city over time?
There's so much good. I've seen it play out in relationships and the trust that can be built over years when you're just, even if you're in different roles, but you're showing up in similar places and gatherings, and it's like, oh yeah, you understand, you love this place. You're not just here for your own ego or this, you're committing yourself, your family's committing yourselves, you're leaning into your school system or your, whatever the expression is. So I have found so much joy through that, where I first thought it was limiting. I felt like, oh, am I limiting myself to do this nonprofit work? Or I saw it as almost through the scarcity lens, and it's been the opposite. It's been this abundance thing where there's been depth there. I've been exposed to people in people groups that I had not been connected with growing up. So just from like a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, or a multicultural way of seeing, because Tacoma's got all kinds of languages and food and groups represented. I just think sometimes if we're just scratching the surface of a place, we don't get to know those people. We don't get to know their stories or their culture. And so for me, that's been a piece of it. And it's just, and it's fun too to know people that know my parents and to have some of that just kind of legacy as well. I think on the work side, it's been really useful because just over time, you just get to know where the resources are and how to be creative around connecting. And that doesn't always happen. So if you kind of go, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so and let's make this happen. And that's where I get a lot of energy, right? Is to bring people together, maybe in new ways, so that we can tackle an issue that's hard for the community.
Yeah.
And I think that, one way that there's Peter Block wrote a book called Community, and the subtitle was A Structure of Belonging. And I just love that, because I just feel like part of committing to place is committing to trying to find a place of belonging, which is I think what we all want at some level in our hierarchy of needs. And so that to me has been, it's part of identity, but it's also just like, we get one life. So I'm going to do it here and see where that goes.
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend of mine about his workplace. His name's Grant. And we were talking about, he oversees his company, and he has hired an executive over belonging.
Really?
And her responsibility is just to cultivate a sense of belonging amidst the organization. And I think there's only like 24 employees. So it's not like not even a medium-sized business. It's a small business. But to prioritize that, because as you said, there is that core human need, that desire. And so he wants to cultivate that even in the workplace in a similar way that you're finding that, discovering that, and helping to build that in your city, in your community. And again, I'll just say that I find that uncommon, and it's refreshing that I saw that conviction in so many people who lived in Tacoma.
I think one of the common traits for people that I love to be around is that there's an intellectual humility, there's a desire to learn, and there's a desire to seek out wisdom of other people, so I think for people that are even trying to say, where do I fit into this picture? It's been helpful for me just to listen to others tell their story. There was a priest that would read poems that I would show up, and he would tell his story about alcoholism and recovering from that, and then how poetry kind of brought him out of the depths of that. And then he would just read these beautiful poems, and I just sit there and taking it in and learning about myself and my community just through this person. So I just think I'm a big fan of mentorship in general, but just seeking out other people that might be different than you and going, why do they love this community? Because desire is mimetic, right? So that's what happened to me. I saw someone's joy for this, and I was like, oh, I like that person. I want to be like them. So I'm going to follow their lead a little bit. Is kind of how simple it was. But that's how we work. So
as a priest that had abused alcohol, was in recovery, and somehow poetry was playing a role in his recovery?
Yes. In fact, he would tell the story about when he kind of hit rock bottom. I remember him saying he sort of wandered into a bookstore and just randomly bought 2 things of poetry. And through reading those, it was like he had this deep transformative experience. And then it just became a part of his ongoing recovery for life. And so he was this curator of great poems. And in fact, I would grab his collection because I was an English major in college that sort of avoided poetry and didn't realize the power of it until after. And I just love how certain people can put into words what you've been experiencing. In fact, I would say about you have this gift. You have this ability to kind of capture what people have been experiencing in a way that's like, yes, thank you. Thank you for saying what I've been, experiencing. So,
yeah. Yep. Well, I appreciate that about you. In our times together, I picked up on the fact that you were a fan of poetry, and it's not something that I have dabbled in much. So give us a very high level overview, or let's do it this way: spark our interest for poetry. Why should the average person who is not engaged in reading poetry and writing poetry, very like lyrically oriented in their mind, where's a place to start, and why should they start to engage with the craft?
Well, for me, poetry also came out of a love of music. And so it was a lifelong, music. I came into finding that I loved music and loved creating music a little bit late in life. But after college, was writing music, was part of a choir, and was also doing a bunch of other types of music, from choral to jazz to sort of singer-songwriter stuff. And so some people were really drawn to the melody, and I was drawn to the lyric, so it was like, what is this person trying to say? What's this poet trying to say? And from there, kind of fell in with some friends that were really amateurs, but we all just said, hey, once a week, let's write a poem and challenge ourselves. Everyone gets a turn to pick the subject, and then we would just sort of share them. And so we did a little bit of writing, but then that also got me interested in reading. And what I'll say about my experience of poetry is that it's really subjective, so some people might go, this person's just great. And then you might go, that doesn't connect with me at all. Right. And so that's, first of all, what I would say is find something maybe that works for you. I also think poetry is sort of meant to be read aloud. So it's a great communal experience. And for some people, whether it's spoken word or different expressions of poetry, it's a healing experience, right? It's the way that their art becomes a way of reconnecting divided parts of themselves. So I have, and I could read an excerpt for you if you want, but there's some poems that have been helpful for me, or poets like Mary Oliver is a really well-known poet who just passed away, had a really hard life. And so she would go out into nature and she would just capture her observations. And for me, even though she's dialed into nature, even in a way that I'm not, I love nature, but I'm not like spending all day out there like she would, but it was just, she would kind of capture the transcendent world in the most particular and tangible things in a way that I was just like, sometimes I'm in tears because the way that people phrase something, it just sort of hits you in a way you didn't know you were living. So I don't know. Yeah. That's one way.
Can you give us one?
Sure. I'll read an excerpt. There's a couple that came to mind, but particularly right now, and because of COVID-19, happening during the Lenten journey and the wilderness journey of Lent, I came across this poem called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. So I'll just read an excerpt from it right now. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. While the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So for me, I didn't realize that when I first loved this poem that wild geese was a Celtic image for the Holy Spirit. And it's like you have this idea of the dove, which seems really gentle, but the wild goose is very much this like frenetic, you're going this way, you thought you're going this way, but then it really disrupted your idea of where things were going. But I love the belonging that we just talked about that's there, right? You're announcing your place in the family of things. And that this is the part that speaks to me around just like, let's start with despair, because you have moments of that. Let's name that, and then let's talk about how the world is showing up every day throughout that despair, and how I can go to some dark places or some places of fear and scarcity, but through a lot of different ways, places of beauty and friendship, I belong, in this whole thing. And it's sort of a perspective thing. So that's one example. And it's how nature has been healing for me too. When I get in my head, sometimes I just need to get outside and just see the creation, so.
Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
Now, as we wrap up here, as you look ahead post-COVID, as we're kind of transitioning back into figuring out what the new normal is and how we go, and you're dealing with people who are in despair, you're dealing with people who have been maybe most negatively impacted in your community. Where are you finding hope, and how would you point people to hope who maybe are watching or listening and are struggling, or they find themselves in a role where they're trying to bring hope to other people?
That's a good question. Well, like many people in charge of organizations or other nonprofit leaders, it's been a really stressful time through COVID-19, and our executive team we're doing daily stand-up meetings to try to figure out first, how do you get your own staff and safe, and doing maybe telehealth for the first time. So it's pushing us to innovate. And that is a place of generosity where I've seen the community step up. We don't have enough laptops. So we raise some money really quickly to make sure that our team can still do their work. So I think through the generosity of the community, even if they're asking themselves about their own jobs, we read a lot about where things are going wrong, but I've been seeing firsthand how people are rallying and connecting, and the philanthropic community through local foundations are coming together and creating response funds. So that's hopeful for me, because it's like, there's people out there that are not forgetting about folks that could easily be forgotten. And I think that it's, other places of hope are looking at people like yourself or others that are doing good work or trying to connect people that are maybe feeling alone. I would say for those that are feeling stressed out or even to a place of despair, to talk to someone. I just want to be another one to encourage that. It can be really hard to do that when you're in that space. There's a couple articles I've read around the stages of grief and how this is collective grief, and it's easy to do the kind of comparative suffering thing. And I've been thinking a lot about compassion fatigue even. But if you find yourself in a place of just like, why don't I have the energy, and I shouldn't even be feeling this way because other people have it harder than me, or whatever that is, I just want to call that out and say it's not right. And especially for leaders that feel like they need to even be doing more right now. It's a hard time. There's a lot of unknowns, right? And it's hitting on a bunch of different levels. So I can see a lot of good and opportunity that's going to come through this time, but I also just want to name the fact that this is a hard time for a lot of people, and especially for members of the church or organizations that are caring for. I have colleagues and friends that are doing, food, and those lines are getting long. I'm seeing the stats go up, so that's the hard news. But I find a lot of hope in watching the community rally, and I wish we would just tell those stories.
Yeah. Well, thank you for telling some of those stories. Thank you for tuning our hearts in that direction and giving us an example of investing in place and investing in people who are at risk. I think that's inspiring. It's an encouragement and a good reminder for me. And also thanks for the poetry. You are a Renaissance man, and I appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship and your leadership in that community.
Same. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for having me on your podcast and just having the conversation. It's always good to see your face.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Yep. Thanks, Elliot. We'll catch up soon. I'll be up in your Pacific Northwest at some point this summer. So
nice. Good. I'll look forward to it.
Okay, buddy. Thanks for the time.
I'll see you soon.